Back to Hardball. The showdown over the government shutdown is shaping up to be a political test over who can survive the economy or can survive the challenges within his own party. Can Speaker Boehner control those unruly Tea Partiers who refuse to give in on any spending cuts? And can President Obama strike a deal with Republicans without alienating progressives, liberals in his own party? And who's in a tighter vice right now? Let's bring in two MSNBC political analysts, Howard Fineman, who's also with the Huffington Post, of course, and Richard Wolffe. Gentlemen, let me talk to you about this fight because it's one of those interesting things. Boehner looks like he's in the most trouble because he seems to look, he's almost going to cry or he's nervous or he's sweating. No, seriously. Yeah. I don't say this lightly.
No,
I do look like I do feel for this guy. Yeah. He has a lot of people behind him he's never had to deal with before. These are not professional politicians behind him. They're newbies. And some of them come in and they just want to win, then they're ready to compromise.
Well, what I find interesting about this is I think in narrow sort of poker terms, Boehner's doing very well. I think he's cleaning the president's clock. I mean, he's got the White House up to $35 billion or something like that.
Starting with zero.
Yeah, starting with zero. These are big, big cuts. But no matter how cleverly, and I think pretty well, Boehner's played the inside game, he's losing two levels of the outside game. The first to the Tea Party people, and you had one of them on, saying $61 billion or bust. Yeah. And I think the wider public, which is upset with everybody, but I think in the end will still, despite the clever maneuvering by Boehner on the military funding and all that, still more likely blame the Republicans.
Richard Wolffe, the question is, Boehner, is he in a vice? I see him in a vice three ways. He's got the president pushing from one side, the Tea Party's from behind him, and then he's got the social conservatives. By the way, the Tea Party fellow was just on. Macklin said, news. I'm not with them. I'm with the money people. I want to cut the money. I don't care about these. At least my group doesn't care about these other things like birth control and environmental protection.
Well, let's talk about the inside game versus the outside game. Right now, he only has to play the inside game, and he's doing it well.
The president, Boehner.
Boehner is. Yeah. But
the Boehner?
The Boehner. You got
me. Be careful there.
No. Okay. The Speaker. He is actually, all he has to do is care about the Republican challenge he's going to face in the primaries and the people who put him there. The problem is there's going to be a deal. At this point, he doesn't have to deal, but there will be a deal, whether it's 3 weeks into a shutdown
Where does conceptual
or now.
Notion come? There will be a deal.
Of course, there's going to be a deal.
Strikes always end?
Because they have. Yes, they do, actually. Wow. And even governments reopen after a shutdown. There will be a deal, and that deal is not going to be $100 billion. It's not.
Do you agree there's going to be a deal in the foreseeable future? We could go on for weeks like this.
Here's the, again, to go back to the poker game, here's where the president made a mistake, I think. Well, there are two things that were a problem. The Democrats didn't pass a budget last year, which sort of it means that there's no fire break for the president. He's basically doing this himself because there's no Democratic marker from the Senate. That's number one. Number two, the president agreed to these little bites of the apple with a continuing resolutions.
Current spending.
Yes, okay. First was 2 weeks for $4 billion. Then the Republicans came back for another 2 weeks for $6 billion. Now the Republicans are back saying, well, we just want a little bit more, sir. How about 1 week for $12 billion? And that's difficult for the president. Republicans like continuing it that way.
Let's watch this interesting development. Here's what John Boehner said. The Speaker said last night about his relationship with Tea Party people, with House members of the Tea Party. Let's listen.
You know what the Democrats say? They say they could cut a deal with you, but you won't buck the Tea Party.
Listen, there's no daylight between the Tea Party and me.
You know, that's a big development, Richard. Last fall, he was talking about how they're going to have their first sort of adult moment.
Right.
A bit dismissive. Now, he's them.
Well, yeah, it makes perfect sense for him. That's his politics. He doesn't really need to reach out to independents. He doesn't have to play the bigger game for the Republican Party. He just has to work for House Republicans.
The 218.
That's it. That's all he needs. And that's all he needs for his job. It's the president who has to speak to a bigger audience.
Okay,
if the Republican candidates
Okay, well, here's how he was talking as recently as December, though, speaking to the New Yorker magazine in December about how he'll have to keep on moving the prompter, please.
Then shut down already.
John Boehner spoke to New York in December about how he'll have to deal with Republican newcomers on the issue of raising the debt ceiling. He said, quote, this is in December to the New Yorker, this is going to be probably the first really big adult moment for the new Republican majority. You can underline adult. This is him speaking. And for people who have never been in politics, it's going to be one of those growing moments. It's going to be difficult, but we'll have to find a way to help educate members and help people understand the serious problem that would exist if we don't do it. And there he is talking about the debt ceiling. That is a bit paternalistic or patronizing, if you will.
Yes. And also, when you have to say something like, there's no daylight between me and the Tea Party,
now
it means there is. He's denying...
That's a mixed metaphor, first of all.
It means there is. And secondly, yes, and Richard's absolutely right. In a way, the president wins by losing here, because, I mean, I'm criticizing him as a poker player, but in the larger sense, if you had a graphic on earlier about how the president is doing better among moderates.
Yes.
If they end up with the final resolution here of $35-40 billion in cuts or something like that, and it becomes finalized, the president, Boehner's then going to have a challenge from the right, but the president's going to win because he's going to be the guy who was around when the moderate deal was made.
The American politics is always based on who can get to the center when the vote's coming.
Mm-hmm.
The president's racing to the center.
Yes, they're being dragged to the center.
He's done his liberal thing. He did health care. He did a lot of things last year. A lot of stimulus, a lot of stuff that hurt him for a while there. But he's saying, no, now it's time to go to the center. Whereas Boehner is saying, no, having spent his life as sort of a conservative, he now has to go to the right.
Problem for Boehner.
Isn't that a problem?
It's a problem, but the bigger problem is this. They got the majority back by talking about jobs. The president wasn't talking about jobs. They were going to focus on jobs. Tell me one job this is going to create. Even Boehner says it's going to cost more to shut down the government, reopen it. Yeah. They're off subject.
You know the Republican argument.
Yeah.
You don't play dumb. You're not playing dumb. You know what the argument is. The less government spends, the more money there is for people to spend.
What fascinates me by this whole thing is that the president...
Does anyone think it creates a job? Okay. One job.
Okay. The president, I'm fascinated to watch the president on this because he has this ability to seem like he's being dragged to the middle. He did it on health care. To the dismay of some on the left of his party. Now he's being, quote, dragged, or I'm saying he's being outmaneuvered politically by Boehner, but where the president's going to end up is in the vicinity of a moderate deal that's going to, within the context of current politics, that's going to raise his numbers with moderates.
Well, according to reports, the stakes have taken an emotional turn for Boehner. Today's L.A. Times, Los Angeles Times reports, quote, the emotional toll of the protracted debate has become apparent earlier in the day when Boehner choked up at a closed-door meeting of Republicans over the support he received for his hardline stance. So he's feeling it. And also the Politico reported yesterday that Boehner told the GOP conference on Monday that those who voted against him the last time around abandoned him, a message that some lawmakers privately said was overly emotional. So he's getting emotional about people who've screwed him, basically, and people who've loved him. This guy is really unstable here.
Yeah, but look,
I mean, emotionally, he seems to go in either direction. If you love me, oh. If you don't love me, oh. I mean, the guy is so sensitive.
No, what he's saying there, though, is, look, you abandoned me on that continuing resolution thing. Don't abandon me on this. In other words, he's looking forward to the deal that ultimately, I think Richard's right, is going to be cut. And he's basically saying to those people, look, you screwed me on the earlier thing. You got to stick with me on this one. I think that's what the message behind that was.
You mean that song, Don't Come Knocking at My Window, You Don't Love Me Anymore?
Well, he's basically saying there's going to be something. Okay, you abandoned me on that continuing resolution deal. You're going to have to stick with me on this. And, of course, maybe he's crying because he knows that they won't.
He's crying because he said he didn't want to have two bad choices, meaning two budget bad deals. His actual bad deal is shut down or losing the support of his caucus. Both of them are bad for him. Right. They're bad for Republicans in general. They're bad for him. And they're going to have to go through much more pain, which may be more
I'm just stunned by this person. I think we're going to be able to watch this at the end of the week, like a week's capsule, and you're going to see Boehner looking nervous and sweaty and almost crying, and Obama kind of delightfully debonair.
Compromise works for Obama. It does not work for...
He said that first.
And I agree with everything you said.
That's right. But he said it first. By a nanosecond,
yeah.
Well, he did. By a hair.